Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, cuts to the price farmers get for milk.
Behind each of these numbers is a real farming family that's looking at their incomes dropping by between 12 and 18% in one day.
First, all this week we're focusing on livestock marts. Today we're looking at the impact of the bluetongue restrictions on the buying and selling of livestock. Bluetongue affects cattle and sheep, along with deer, goats and camels. It can cause ulcers or sores around an animal's mouth and face, difficulties swallowing and breathing, and lead to fetal deformities and stillbirths. It's a virus spread by midges and poses no threat to humans or to food safety. Well, earlier this year, as you may remember, a restriction zone was brought in across the whole of England after several cases of the virus were confirmed. That meant cattle and sheep moving from England to Wales had to be tested and hold a movement licence. Those restrictions were eased last week, meaning vaccinated animals can now cross the border freely. So what have been the consequences for the industry? Marie-Claire Carey-Jones has been to Bilth Wells Market to gauge reaction.
Greg Christopher, I'm a livestock auctioneer for Bilth and Hereford Market Auctioneers. It's had a huge impact. Our main business would be in Hereford. Traditionally, Hereford would be a store sale, so we have breeding ewes and store lambs there every Tuesday. But obviously, since the bluetongue regulations, we've had to sort of enforce sales of store sheep in Bilth on a different day. So obviously, we've got double costs to running the sales. So it has made a big impact. It's been very hard. Obviously, a lot of farmers haven't really fully understood the rules and regulations. So there's been constant stream of phone calls, inquiries, and people just not really understanding the full where they can sell and where they can't sort of purchase.
Now, restrictions were lifted here in Wales last week, making it easier to move livestock around. The timing of it has coincided with the first two cases of bluetongue being found in Wales. What are people saying to you about it?
I think they're all just very unsure. Nobody seems to know what's going to happen. Is there going to be a restricted area around there where they found the cases? I don't think they've achieved anything by what they have tried to enforce. All they've done is disrupted trade, and I think they've made a lot of farmers very, very unsure of what they can and cannot do.
Farmers here at the market today are just trying to get on with the situation.
It is a worry, but we're going into winter now, so hopefully the midges, I'm not a scientist, but the midges hopefully won't be around in the winter.
We sell a lot of our stock dead weight, so we don't use the markets too much. So it hasn't implicated my holding much. Others it might have.
What do you think about the restrictions being lifted, though? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, obviously it's not easy having restrictions on farmers.
And farming unions agree.
We definitely welcome the change that from the 21st, I think it was, of September, the sheep and cattle that were vaccinated were able to cross from the restricted zone into Wales with just a general licence. A key part of this throughout and feedback that we've been hearing from our members is we've got to try and balance the impact of having the disease, which no farmer wants, against the impact that the restrictions were having, both on the ability of a farmer to run their business and also the economic impact those restrictions were having on the industry more generally.
In a statement, the Welsh Government said it's keeping its bluetongue policy under regular review based on emerging evidence. It went on to urge livestock keepers to continue to be vigilant, to practice safe sourcing of livestock and to talk to their vets about bluetongue vaccination.
Marie-Claire Carey-Jones reporting there. Well, the latest figures from DEFRA show 83 bluetongue cases in England and 4 in Wales. Dr Carrie Batten is the World Organisation for Animal Health's bluetongue expert and head of the National Reference Laboratory for the disease at the Purbright Institute.
We're in a relatively, I would say, lucky position that we are moving towards the winter months, which means the midges which transmit the disease are starting to decline. However, there's still a bit of a time lag from the point that we have infectious midges at the moment that will still be able to bite new hosts, cause new infections until those midges go ahead and die off as the winter goes on. So I think people need to remain vigilant. They need to be looking for clinical signs and, where possible, vaccinating their flocks.
Last week we had calls from vets to farmers to vaccinate their flocks, but the latest figures I could find suggested that about 3% of cattle and sheep have been vaccinating, suggesting that farmers don't really think it's worth it.
So I think farmers need to talk to their vets about the pros and cons of vaccination. I think farmers have their own individual right to decide whether to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. But the only way to really address a large-scale bluetongue outbreak is to protect the national herd.
So we've got 87 cases in total at the minute. Does that count as a large-scale outbreak?
There will be more bluetongue out there. Cattle often are asymptomatic. Sheep can be asymptomatic. So what we are detecting are the severe clinical cases that we certainly have been observing recently in Devon and Cornwall and now in Wales.
And also in Cornwall, you found another case, which is a different strain of this disease.
Yes, that's correct. So there was a clinical suspicion of bluetongue in a sheep late last week. Those samples came into the laboratory. We detected bluetongue. Bluetongue type 3 was not detected, but we did find bluetongue type 8. And this is the first time that we've detected BTV type 8 since about 2008. There has been a large outbreak of bluetongue type 8 in the southwest of France, and it's highly likely that this infection in Cornwall is a result of bluetongue infected midges, so midges infected with BTV8 coming over from the continent into Cornwall.
How different are 3 and 8?
Bluetongue is very much more than one disease. There are currently 29 recognised classic serotypes of BTV, all of which present slightly differently in terms of their clinical severity. So I think what we need to understand here is that although we now have vaccines against bluetongue type 3, those vaccines would not protect against BTV8, and nor would BTV8 vaccines, which we also have available, protect against BTV3. So they really are two separate diseases.
Which, from a farming point of view, makes it even more complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly need people to continue to vaccinate against BTV3. The question around BTV8 vaccination will really depend on the emerging picture.
How does what's happening here compare with what's been happening in Europe over the summer?
I think to give farmers some good news will be that through mandatory vaccination in Belgium and voluntary vaccination against BTV3 in the Netherlands, they've seen very, very few cases. Now, granted, they would have had a lot of infection in the 2 years prior, but vaccination clearly has dampened the outbreak this season.
Obviously, for a farmer who gets animals infected with this disease, this is serious. But it doesn't affect humans, it doesn't affect meat going into the food chain. Why should non-farmers worry about it?
Well, I think it does matter because it's all linked to food security, because we may well see, abortions, deformed calves, deformed ewes being produced later in the season. So there will be a knock-on effect to overall food production in the UK. And obviously farmers are already under a lot of financial constraints and have financial concerns and mental health well-being. So I think we need to protect our livestock industry, and a big element of that is disease control and ensuring that we have a healthy flock.
Dr. Carrie Batten there. The new Environment Secretary Emma Reynolds says farming is transforming and modernising. In one of her first speeches at the Labour Party conference, she spoke about nature restoration and cleaning up rivers, while avoiding tricky subjects like inheritance tax on farms and the long-awaited details on England's reorganised SFI environmental scheme, which were promised for this summer but haven't yet emerged. She told delegates she's seen firsthand how much we depend on hardworking farmers.
Farming is essential to economic growth and prosperity. Supporting sustainable farming means food security, rural jobs, and leading the world in agricultural innovation. We are already making progress, and we have secured the biggest budget for sustainable farming and nature recovery in this country's history. And there is much more to do. We will bring forward the farming roadmap and the land use framework to pave the way towards a profitable and healthy farming future.
Emma Reynolds, the Environment Secretary there. Well, the price farmers are paid for milk is falling. This comes at a bad time for many farmers who are having to buy in food for their cows after the long hot summer slowed or stopped the growth of grass. Processors are cutting between 1.5 and 8 pence a litre this month, saying that while they recognise the challenges for farmers, they can't ignore the current oversupply of milk in the market and falling global prices. Well, this follows a relatively stable period for milk prices, and there are fears that there'll be a return to the rollercoaster approach of a few years ago, where volatility in the market led to high prices, followed by farmers being paid less than it cost to produce the milk. Well, the difference this time is FDOM. That's the Fair Dealing Obligations (Milk) regulations, introduced by the government last year and designed to make contracts between processors and farmers fairer. Paul Tompkins is a dairy farmer in Yorkshire and chairs the National Farmers Union Dairy Board. He spoke to me from the South West Dairy Day.
Behind each of these numbers that might seem small, 2, 5 or 8 pence a litre, is a real farming family that's looking at their incomes dropping by, maybe between 12 and 18% in one day. And these are the farming people that we rely on to produce our food. They get up at 5 o'clock in the morning every single day, who are now looking at what, in the interest of nobody, which is serious financial distress.
Although processors say there's just too much milk in the market, demand is static and global prices are falling. So you can sort of see where they're coming from here.
Well, this is a story about supply and demand. On a global level, it's worth pointing out, the US and New Zealand have just had their best month on record in August. The EU are now producing more milk. That has meant that traders in these international commodities have stepped back from buying. And what that's done is pulled the sentiment from the market, and bang, all of a sudden, in that instant, we've seen a slump in commodity prices, which has been translated into farm gate prices.
We've got quite a range of cuts here, haven't we? Processors, it sort of starts at 1.5 pence a litre, but it goes up to 8 pence a litre. Why is there that big spread?
There's a question I have unanswered, if I'm honest with you as well, Charlotte. It's something I'm seeking some clarity, because it's worth pulling in here the reminder that under new dairy contract regulations, it should be really clear to farmers about how their milk price is generated.
What you're talking about here is the Fair Dealing Obligations (Milk) regulations. What difference is that honestly making at this point?
Well, the milk price regulations that you mentioned were never there to set milk prices for dairy farmers. What they do talk around in regards to milk pricing is introducing that transparency. And that's what's so important, that the regulations is there to make sure that farmers understand how their milk price is generated. So when they see international commodity prices changing, they can understand what that translation means onto farm, and therefore, if there is justification in the up or down milk price that they're seeing happening in their milk check. Also, those regulations are overseen by an adjudicator, and this is going to be a testing time to see if these regulations are indeed going to deliver that transparency and understanding, that justification for any change that we all hope that they are there to do.
Over the past few months, we have heard from dairy farmers who've been struggling because of the hot weather and the lack of grass. That has meant they're buying in food, which means life is more expensive. We have, though, had a period of reasonably good prices. So given the past volatility that we've seen on milk prices, people will have saved for this rainy day.
Well, whilst we've had a period of sustainable milk pricing, what that's allowed farmers to do is reinvest in their businesses, and that could arguably put them in a more favourable space as we enter a period of adjustments. But the underlying problem is that we're still now facing the very real prospect of dairy farmers being in financial distress where they're simply unable to meet the monthly costs of running a dairy farm.
The NFU's Paul Tompkins there. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.